Welcome to Conspiracy Q,
Oh, yeah.
your weekly top-secret investigation into history's most suppressed truths.
The wildest, most shocking theories.
And today, we're diving into some recently uncovered intel that suggests a massive cover-up
Uh-oh.
by Big Pharma.
Here we go.
It's a conspiracy that's been around for a while, but this file gives us a lot more detail. It claims that cures for major diseases like cancer, AIDS, even Alzheimer's,
Wow.
actually exist,
It exists.
but are being deliberately hidden.
Why? Why would they do that?
That's what we're going to look into.
Okay.
You shared a file with us, marked Top Secret Unclassified Intel File, hashtag BX1135, titled Operation Pharmakon, Big Pharma's Global Suppression of Natural Cures. And we're going to unpack its shocking allegation.
Yeah, wait.
Our mission, to understand the core arguments and evidence presented in this document that you felt was so important to bring to light.
Well, I think it raises some really, really important questions, and kind of challenges the way we think about, health and disease and the whole system, really.
This file definitely doesn't pull any punches.
No, it jumps right in with a very bold claim, doesn't it?
Like right off the bat, it claims that solutions for things like cancer, AIDS, and Alzheimer's, these aren't just, far-off hoax, but something that's been intentionally kept from us.
Secret cures, huh? It's a classic conspiracy theory trope.
And not just kept quiet,
Mm.
but actively, allegedly, sabotaged.
Sabotaged? Like how?
Through smear campaigns, legal battles, and even targeting individuals who get too close to these so-called suppressed truths.
That sounds pretty intense. Are they talking about specific cases?
Oh yeah, we're going to get into those.
Okay.
But first, the file even suggests that all those conspiracy theorists we often hear about, the ones who've been talking about this for years, might have been onto something all along.
It makes you wonder, doesn't it? I mean, is there something to these fringe ideas that we've been too quick to dismiss?
Well, the file tries to back up these big claims with a whole series of events and stories, both from the past and present.
Okay, so how does it do that? What kind of evidence does it present?
So the first chapter dives into what it calls vanished cures. It kicks off with a story about Dr. Raymond Rife back in the 1930s.
Okay, I've heard that name before. Wasn't he the guy who invented some kind of cancer-killing machine?
Exactly. Apparently, he developed a machine that used specific electromagnetic frequencies, almost like a targeted radio wave, to destroy cancer cells.
Sounds pretty futuristic for the 1930s.
I know, right? And the file claims he even had successful treatments, like people with terminal cancer were supposedly cured.
So what happened? If he had this miracle cure, why isn't it being used today?
Well, that's where it gets interesting, or I guess, according to the file, pretty disturbing.
Okay, I'm listening.
It claims that his research was systematically undermined. His lab was burned down, his partners either died untimely deaths or just disappeared. The American Medical Association completely dismissed his work, and then Rife himself died under what they call suspicious circumstances.
Wow. That's quite a story. But it's just a story, right? Are there any, official records or anything to back up these claims?
That's one of the things that make these kinds of deep dives so interesting, isn't it? You have to kind of piece together the information and see what makes sense.
And decide for yourself what to believe. Yeah, I get it. It's like a puzzle. But even if it's true, why would anyone go to such lengths to suppress a cure for cancer?
Well, that's a question that kind of hangs over the whole file. But it does offer some explanations, especially as we get deeper in. But before we get to that, there's another vanished cure story in this chapter that I thought was really intriguing.
Oh, yeah. Tell me about it.
It's about Rene Caisse and her Essiac tea. Have you heard of that?
Essiac tea. Rings a bell. I think I saw something about it online, but I don't really know the details.
So she was a Canadian nurse who used this herbal tea formula, apparently learned from an Ojibwe healer, to treat cancer patients.
Okay, so a more natural approach.
Right. And the file says that patients had, miraculous results.
Miraculous. Come on, that sounds a bit exaggerated, doesn't it?
Well, that's what the file claims. But instead of, getting recognition or funding for research, the Canadian government and medical authorities actually tried to arrest her.
Arrest her for making tea? That seems extreme.
Right. And eventually, they forced her to close her clinic. And what's even more interesting, according to the file, no large-scale scientific studies were ever allowed to investigate the effectiveness of this tea.
That's suspicious. If it was just some harmless herbal concoction, why would they go to such lengths to shut it down?
That's exactly the question the file asks. Why would a simple herbal tea be, criminalized?
It does make you wonder what they were so afraid of.
This case, along with the Rife story, starts to paint a picture of a pattern where anything that challenges the conventional medical approaches, especially if it's outside the realm of, Big Pharma's control, gets met with resistance.
So it's not just about suppressing cures, but also about controlling what kind of treatments are considered acceptable.
Exactly. And this leads into Chapter 2, which gets right to the heart of the matter: follow the money.
So now we're talking about the profit motive. That's usually where the real juicy conspiracy stuff starts.
Well, this chapter lays it out pretty clearly. It starts by talking about just how massive the global cancer treatment market is. We're talking hundreds of billions of dollars right now, and it's projected to grow even bigger in the next few years.
Yeah, cancer treatment is big business, that's for sure.
And the file's argument is basically this: chemotherapy, radiation, surgery, even though they might help manage the disease, extend life in some cases, they don't actually cure cancer.
And that means
It means that people become lifelong patients.
lifelong customers.
Exactly.
So a cure would be bad for business.
That's the gist of it. And it goes even further.
Okay, how so?
It talks about patents, which, are a huge part of the pharmaceutical industry.
Right. Patents give them exclusive rights to sell a drug for a certain period.
And that's where the problem comes in with natural cures.
What do you mean?
Natural substances, the kinds of things you find in plants or the body produces naturally, they generally can't be patented in the same way that a new synthetic drug can.
So no patent means no big profits.
Exactly. The file argues that this creates a huge financial incentive to suppress research into natural cures. Because if a natural cure was proven effective, there's no way to really control it, to make those huge profits that Big Pharma is used to.
So it's more profitable to keep people sick and dependent on expensive treatments.
That's the cynical but, kind of logical conclusion that the file presents.
It's pretty disturbing if you think about it.
And it gets even more disturbing in Chapter 3, which is titled Disappearing Doctors and Dead Scientists.
Okay, now we're getting to the really dark stuff.
This chapter lays out what it calls the holistic doctor death list. It claims that over 90 holistic doctors, doctors who focus on alternative treatments, died under what they call strange circumstances between 2015 and 2020.
90 doctors? That's a lot. What kind of strange circumstances are we talking about?
Accidents, suicides that didn't quite add up, sudden illnesses, things like that.
It does make you wonder if there's a connection.
Right. And they highlight a couple of specific cases. One is Dr. Jeffrey Bradstreet, who was researching something called GcMAF, a protein that supposedly helps boost the immune system for cancer and autism. He was found dead with a gunshot wound ruled a suicide, but his family and colleagues have questioned that conclusion.
So they think there might have been foul play.
That's what they're suggesting.
Mm.
Then there's Dr. Nicholas Gonzalez, who was a pioneer in alternative cancer treatments. He died of a sudden heart attack, but the autopsy was inconclusive.
So again, there's this question mark hanging over his death.
And the file presents all of this and asks a very direct and disturbing question. Were these deaths, and all the others on this list, a result of these doctors getting too close to cures that someone didn't want them to find?
It's a pretty chilling thought. But, it's important to remember that correlation doesn't equal causation. Just because these doctors died and it was maybe suspicious doesn't automatically mean they were silenced for their research.
I agree. It's important to keep a critical mind. But the file definitely raises some red flags.
It does. It makes you want to dig deeper, see if there's any real evidence to back up these claims.
Well, Chapter 4, Pieces That Don't Add Up, dives into a couple more specific examples that they argue point to this larger pattern of suppression.
Okay, let's hear them.
It starts by going back to GcMAF, that protein I mentioned earlier that Dr. Bradstreet was researching.
The one that supposedly boosts the immune system.
Right. It had shown some promising results in early trials, not just for cancer, but for autism, too.
Interesting. So what happened?
The file claims that labs in Europe that were involved in GcMAF research were raided, their supplies were confiscated, and websites that were sharing information about it were taken down.
By who?
It doesn't go into specifics about who exactly carried out these actions, but it frames it as a coordinated effort to shut down access to this potentially life-saving treatment.
It does seem strange that they would go to such length to suppress a natural substance. If it wasn't effective, why bother?
Exactly. And then the other example you give in this chapter is cannabis and cancer.
Oh, that's a hot topic.
There's a growing body of research showing that THC and CBD, the main compounds in cannabis, can kill cancer cells in lab settings.
Right, I've seen some of those studies.
But here's the kicker. The U.S. government actually holds patents related to cannabinoids specifically for their neuroprotective and anti-inflammatory properties.
So they recognize its medical potential.
It seems that way. But at the same time, cannabis is still classified as a Schedule I drug at the federal level.
Which means
It means it's considered to have no currently accepted medical use and a high potential for abuse.
so they're saying it has medical benefits and no medical benefits at the same time? That doesn't make any sense.
It does seem like a contradiction.
Yeah.
And the file interprets this as another example of suppressing a natural cure, maybe until they can figure out how to isolate and patent specific compounds for profit.
It's all about control, isn't it? Control the substance, control the narrative, control the profits.
That's the theme that emerges as we move into Chapter 5, control the narrative.
Okay, so now we're getting into the media and how they play a role in all of this.
This chapter argues that the media landscape is a key part of maintaining this whole cover-up.
How so?
It points out that something like 90% of U.S. media outlets are owned by just a handful of big corporations.
Yeah, we know about media consolidation.
And a lot of these corporations get a ton of advertising revenue from, you guessed it, Big Pharma.
Ah, so there's a financial incentive to keep Big Pharma happy.
Right. The file argues that this creates a situation where there's no incentive to report critically on pharmaceutical companies or to promote natural cures that could threaten their profits.
So the information we get about health and medicine is filtered through this lens of corporate interests.
That's what the file is suggesting, and it doesn't stop at the media. It also talks about what it calls scientific gatekeeping.
What's that?
It's the idea that even within the scientific community, there's a bias towards research that can be patented and therefore profitable.
So if a natural cure shows promise, but it can't be patented, it's less likely to get funded or published.
Exactly. The file argues that pharmaceutical companies, who are often the major funders of medical research, they're not going to invest in something they can't make money off of.
So even the research itself is skewed towards what's profitable, not necessarily what's most effective.
Right. It paints a picture of a system where the pursuit of profit might be hindering the discovery and development of real cures.
It's a pretty bleak outlook.
And it gets even more unsettling in Chapter 6, documents they don't want you to read. This is where they start to present some more concrete evidence.
Oh, like what?
Well, they talk about this alleged 2001 memo leak, supposedly from a big pharmaceutical company, though they don't name which one.
Okay, and what did this memo say?
Apparently, it discussed the risk of holistic encroachment, basically the growing popularity of alternative medicine.
That makes sense. If more people are turning to natural cures, that's a threat to Big Pharma's profits.
And it also talked about the threat of unmonetized cure vectors, which is just a fancy way of saying cures that they can't make money off of.
So they were actively aware of this threat.
And the memo supposedly called for implementing what they called narrative management protocols to counter these threats.
Narrative management sounds like a PR spin to me.
Right. It implies a deliberate strategy to control the information that gets out there about natural cures.
So they're not just ignoring them, they're actively trying to discredit them.
That's what the file suggests. And then there's this other bit of evidence they talk about, FOIA findings.
FOIA, that's the Freedom of Information Act, right?
Yeah. The file claims that FOIA requests have uncovered emails between FDA officials and pharmaceutical lobbyists.
Ooh, that could be juicy. What do the emails say?
Well, according to the file, they suggest efforts to suppress clinical trials that showed negative results for pharmaceutical drugs.
So they were hiding data that made their drugs look bad.
And it gets worse. The file claims that some of these FOIA requests uncovered hidden data showing that in certain cases, natural compounds actually outperform synthetic drugs.
Wow, that's pretty damning if it's true.
It would mean that they're not just suppressing information about natural cures, but they're also potentially promoting drugs that they know are less effective.
All for the sake of profit.
That's the argument. And then we get to Chapter 7, which is titled, They Laughed at the Tinfoil Hats.
Okay, that's an interesting title.
This chapter tries to connect this whole idea of suppressed natural cures to other historical examples, where ideas that were initially dismissed as crazy or conspiracy theories turned out to be true.
Like what?
Like the link between smoking and cancer.
Oh yeah, the tobacco industry denied that for years.
And the harmful effects of too much sugar, or how the opioid epidemic was basically orchestrated by pharmaceutical companies.
All things that were initially downplayed or covered up.
Exactly. The file is basically saying, don't dismiss this just because it sounds like a conspiracy. Look at all these other times when we were told something wasn't true, and it turned out to be a huge problem.
It's a fair point. Sometimes the truth is stranger than fiction.
And finally, we get to the final chapter, which addresses the big question. If this were true, wouldn't someone speak out?
Yeah, you'd think someone would blow the whistle if there was really a conspiracy this big.
The file's answer is pretty dark. It says that those who have tried to speak out have faced serious consequences. Death, career destruction, or just being silenced somehow.
So it's too dangerous to speak out.
That's what they're suggesting. And they argue that with so much money at stake, trillions of dollars in the global healthcare market, the people in control will do whatever it takes to protect their profits.
It's a pretty bleak picture, but if there's no one to speak out, how can we ever expose the truth?
That's the challenge, isn't it? It's a system that seems designed to protect itself.
Makes you feel pretty powerless.
And then the file ends with an appendix of suspiciously unanswered questions.
Like what?
Like, why aren't natural treatments studied more rigorously with public funding? Why are cancer survivors constantly asked to donate to research when it seems like we haven't made much progress in finding a cure after all these years? Why do promising leads on natural cures often get shut down or defunded? And, going back to that earlier chapter, why do holistic doctors keep dying in mysterious ways?
It's a lot to think about.
This file you shared, it really makes you question everything you thought you knew about the healthcare system. It raises some really disturbing possibilities. Whether it's all true, or just a very well-crafted conspiracy theory, well, that's for you to decide. But it definitely provides a lot of food for thought. What stood out most to you in this top-secret intel? What avenues of inquiry does it open up in your own mind? Keep digging, keep questioning, and thank you for joining us on Conspiracy Q. Rate and follow to share the truth.
For me, the most unsettling part is the idea that potentially life-saving treatments are being deliberately kept from us for the sake of profit. It makes you wonder what other secrets are out there, what other possibilities we're not even aware of because they've been suppressed.
Definitely makes you wonder.
It's a rabbit hole that goes deep.
Until our next top-secret investigation, keep questioning everything.